All right, we've got a few more on, so we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'd like for you all to do, if you have not already, is to go on over to the handouts tab on the right side of your screen. You'll see where we've got the chat box, and up above it are some tabs. It says chat, polls, or handouts. And so under the handouts tab is the presentation for today. The one limitation that this software has is I can't click the hot links, nor can you from within the presentation. And we're going to go and actually explore a few of these resources that are on the Louisa County Historical Society site, Library of Virginia, things like that together. So if you have that, you can go ahead and open it up, and then you'll be ready as we go down through to click on those hot links and come right in as we do that. Okay. Well, this is going to be kind of a trial run for me too. I'm used to seeing everybody in person and having a little more feedback as we go through it. But can everyone hear me okay? Is the volume fine? You can no problem understanding what I'm saying?
Everything's good. Okay.
All right. Then what I may ask you all to do, if you've got any background noise going on, kind of like in the spoofs of the Zoom meetings, go ahead and mute your mic. And that way, when you want to speak, you can turn it back on, but otherwise it won't be giving us stray noise for anything else. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I want to do today. This is going to be a real hands-on thing for you. The beauty of this is I know that you're on a good connection and savvy enough to be able to get some of these resources into your own pocket as we go through this. So what my attempt here today is going to be is to present you with the things that I think are the most valuable resources. Once you've gotten your research back to about 1870, 1880, with being able to make that leap back behind, if you call it the brick wall, whatever you want to refer to it as, but behind that time period of 1865. So I'm going to assume that you've already got some experience with the basics of doing family history research. And so if you've not done a great deal of that, I think this is going to make sense to you anyway. Just remember these things, save some of the resources, and when you get back to that point, you'll be good to go. And I'm just allowing a couple of other people as they come on. Okay, I can only have 3 webcams that are on at one time, so no offense to any of you all, but I am going to go ahead and take the webcams off. So if you need to communicate with me, the best thing will be to go ahead and do that by sending me a little note over in the chat section, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go through. So good, everybody's coming on. We're up to 10 now, so welcome to everybody. This is going to be a little bit different probably for all of us as we try to go through this. It looks as though I can't give you the option of just having your microphone on. And with the version we have, I'm limited to only having 3 people with their microphone and their webcam. So to avoid that complication, I'm just going to have nobody with that on. But like a thanks to you, Robert, that you're able to watch just fine. Send me a note as you need to if you have a question about anything in the chat column, and I'll go ahead and keep tabs on that. So for those of you that have just logged on, the first thing is to go ahead and download the handout of the presentation. You'll be needing that to get to some of the hot links. And what I want to do is to start you in some of the records that are here locally in Louisa. Virginia laws are going to apply to all these counties around, so they all were supposed to create the same kind of records. Now, whether or not they still exist in other counties, that's a different matter. Some other counties have better records in certain areas than Louisa has, as in the originals of marriage certificates and things like that, rather than just a roster. But what I'm going to try to do is to take you back through to just look at a couple of case studies as you follow through this with me. And the first thing that I want to do is, if you've located some of your ancestors who were born about 1900, I have a couple of samples here of some people that I've discovered down in the neighborhood where I live and am doing most of my work. Their parents would have been the first generation that married following the Civil War in a way that would have been recorded at the courthouse. Freedmen's Bureau, obviously marriages were taking place prior to that. Freedmen's Bureau recorded those, but they didn't ask the kind of information that were asked on marriage records after the Civil War. Who were your parents? What's your occupation? Those kinds of things, place of birth, and so on. So I know a lot of you have done quite a bit of this research before. A few of you are even much better than I am at giving presentations on podcasts and things like that. So what I'm going to try to do is just walk through this with you and give you some ideas of where I would start with this. So what we're after, again, are the names around the period 1865 to say 1880, 1890, that would give us the potential names of family units, parents, siblings, any of those things that can be good clues for us going forward. And the people that I want to really take a look at today are going to be the parents of a man named Winston Banks, and his parents' names are Granville Banks and Elisha Ann Bradshaw. What we know is they come from the community down on the border between Goochland and Louisa, down near Gum Spring. Both of his parents were born just prior to the Civil War. So, when you kind of think back through your experience, where do you look first when you're looking for this kind of record? Anybody that wants to put in a quick chat comment, I welcome that. This is where I miss having you live so that I could get some feedback from the group. But we each kind of have some favorite spots that we seem to find a lot of our information coming. For me, one of the first places that I like to go is to the marriage records. Now, this particular, and thanks, Vernon, I see yours coming in with birth and death records. Starting with the marriage record, it's going to give us, hopefully, if the couple was married, again, in the late 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, the marriage record is going to look for, is going to ask for the name of the parents of both the husband and the wife, the bride and the groom. So this particular record that I'm showing you right now is Granville's record when he married Eliza Ann Bradford. And it shows you, this is from Goochland County, and so it's a copy of the actual marriage license. The Historical Society went through and photocopied all of those and alphabetized. They're nicely organized in notebooks down there. The same kind of record obviously was created in other counties as well. Louisa doesn't have the originals any longer. They've put it into an index form across rows. So the information should still be there, but it's always nice when we can go to the primary source. So you see, this is where I've found that Winston's parents, or Granville's parents, are listed as Winston Banks and Susan Banks. And of course, Eliza Ann's parents are listed here as well as James Bradshaw and Jane Bradshaw. For those of you, since my pointer doesn't work either in this presentation, this is in the column below the initial box on the top that has the couple's name, and it's over on the right-hand side. We also learned from there that Granville is working for the railroad. It gives us some other information in terms of their age, county of birth, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the great places you can start. You might also have started with a death certificate. Hopefully, if the person reporting the death knew the information, they likewise ask for the parents' names of this particular individual. If these people had been born after the Civil War, then those birth records would also list the names of parents. But since both of these people, Granville and Eliza Ann, were born before the Civil War, this is where we've got the beauty of having them marry into the 1870s and 1880s and able to report who their parents were. So there we are. Good place to start. The next place is to go to the 1870 census and take a look around it. Here, obviously, we find this young person, Granville. I think he's on the 5th line down, highlighted in yellow. And he's 12 years of age in this record in 1870, so born about 1858. And it's listing his parents, sure enough, as Winston and Susan. I'm taking a look at the other siblings' names. There's a Frances and a sister named Missouri, which is going to come in useful as we go through this search. But looking to see what the family names are, as we all know, can help with really giving some clue we might be on the right family tree down the road if some of these names repeat. It's also really good always when you're looking like this where there's so much unknown before it to go back a page, go forward a page, really get an idea of maybe the 12 to 15 people who are listed right around the person you're looking for. So in this case, I noticed that the next family down is headed by a man named Edward Smith. He has a wife named Mary. There are the children. They also are Black. Then the next family is an Addison Knuckles, and he's white. Interesting. When I go back a page earlier, I find another Knuckles family listed. So that would be one of those where I would for sure just tag in my mind that it's possible that there's some relationship with the Knuckles family. Doesn't prove a thing at this point, but possible. So the next question is, where do we go to begin to associate these people who are now in the 1870 census with somebody who might have been the enslaver of these people before the war? And this is where there are a couple of new things we've put up in the last year or so on the Historical Society archives that I want to introduce you to, and I hope that you'll find really helpful. This is where I'd like you to be in your PDF. And if you'll go there with me now, I'm going to do the same thing that you are, but you won't see that I am. And scroll down to that same slide. And you'll notice down at the bottom where the link is, it's in green in the PDF, sort of a light green. Go ahead and click on that. And it's going to take you to a site called PiedmontVirginiaHistory.org. That's coordinated largely by the Louisa County Historical Society. And this is a particular exhibit page that focuses just on African American research before 1870. Some of you may have already been here, and if not, it's going to be just a wealth of information for you. If you just scroll down a little bit, or if you're looking at it full screen, what I'm going to show you is going to be over on the right, but you'll see a listing of 4 different categories. And the first is called Vital Records. Let me know if you're having trouble getting to that. But when you click on Vital Records, what you're going to see, and this is where I wish I could see that all of you are there, so you just have to let me know if you're having any trouble. There are going to be several sets. Now, the birth records, if you'll scroll down in the first, beside the first illustration, to where there's a link that says birth records from 1853 to 1865. Those came to us as a set from the microfilm at the Library of Virginia, and we transcribed them as a set. So they're separate from the birth records following the war that came to us as a separate set. They're here too, but they're not here. If you will go ahead and click on that link, it's going to take you to where that file is in Piedmont, Virginia history. And just below the main title, you're going to see a file that's an Excel sheet. It's an XLSX. If you'll click on that, it's going to give you the option to download it. But it gives you a weird name. So go ahead and rename it and maybe download it into that folder that you created to put the presentation in, and title this Louisa County Births 1853 to 1865, and go ahead and save it. Okay. If we will go back to the exhibit page in Piedmont, Virginia history, and you'll scroll down a little bit more. The next one you come to is going to be the Louisa County Births from 1865 to 1870. And down toward the bottom of the explanatory paragraph, there's another link that's going to give you access to those as well. And that one you'll see that there's an XLSX that is sorted by the informant, in other words, the person who's reporting that birth, and the other one is just straight as the data was put together. So you all are probably very good at sifting and sorting with spreadsheets. I'm seeing from Elizabeth that the link doesn't work. Elizabeth, are you in the PDF that you downloaded from handouts? I'll let you go ahead and check that, Elizabeth, and then report back to me if you're still having trouble with that. But this is going to be a second set of birth records. And these are really important for one particular reason. Immediately after the war, a lot of people who were newly emancipated obviously are not familiar yet with this whole system of reporting official kinds of records. And so very often a former enslaver will report births and deaths for these people, and they'll list their relationship to the family that they're reporting for, to the child or to the parents, as either employer or friend. There's some relationship there where this newly emancipated couple knows they're supposed to report the birth or the death, and so they turn to, it could be a neighbor, but it's very likely that it is a former enslaver, or it's someone who is at least employing this person immediately following the war. It begins again to give you a name. That can be a really helpful clue. Great, thanks. Elizabeth is all set. That's super. So that's really, really helpful. Now, if you'll go back again to the page that we were on, that's the exhibit page here, where we got the births, etc. The next source that you can get is the death records. These are compliments of the Library of Virginia, who we asked to extract Louisa's. Obviously, you can find these on the Library of Virginia's site, one person at a time. The beauty of being able to do this with the death records is that you can sort the entire database from 1853 to 1896 when they end by last name. You can sort it by parents. You know, you're able to possibly reconstruct some family units by manipulating these death records. So they're really, really helpful to have there in a data set like that. So if you're fast and you're caught up, you can go ahead and download those as well, or you can come back later to take a look at that. And then the last set of information that's in there is the Louisa County marriages, and we only transcribed the African American marriages. And these are from 1865 up to 1935. And what you'll find when you go there is, again, an Excel sheet, but each one will have a link to the actual image of the document that's going to be online. And then you can follow the parents' names and so on. We just didn't have the volunteers to transcribe the entire thing through 1935. But you'll see immediately when you find a couple's name that if you go over, I'd say in 70% of the cases, it lists the parents' names as well. And the other information that should have been on a marriage certificate, occupation, place the person was born, etc., that sort of thing. So that's what's really, really valuable in terms of what I would call vital records here in Piedmont, Virginia history. So if you will leave that just for a moment, this is where I can't see you, and the beauty of being online is you can kind of tune out and be in another browser doing whatever you'd like to do. But if you will come back with me to the presentation, I want to show you some samples of what it is that we found there. So the next slide back here with me in Demio is what I found when I filtered those birth records out for a child. I was hoping I would find a child named Granville, born to an enslaved mother named Susan. I didn't find that. But what I found was a really interesting thing. Look at the last entry. In September of 1856, there's a child named Missouri Ellen. Remember that sister that Granville had named Missouri? I mean, how many of those are there going to be? Go on across, and there's a mother named Susan. And you'll see that it reports who the owner is and also the informant in this one. Susan and Missouri Ellen are both enslaved by a man named James M. Wright. All right? So if you look under the informant title, the informant could be, in some cases, if it's a free person of color, a father or a mother. But when the column, and this is how it is from the form, it lists it as father for white children or / owner for those who were enslaved. But it's going to give you the name of that person who's the enslaver, and that might be the trail that we want to follow. Robert, no. What I find here in Louisa, he's asked the question, how many took the name of their former enslaver? I've found that it's maybe 20% who take the name of the person who enslaved them directly before the Civil War. What I have found is that they often took the name of an enslaver a generation or two back, particularly if they were either sold or there was perhaps a father who was on another property. They'll take that father's name. So no, it's not a helpful clue necessarily to pursue last name. So again, I've seen about 20% here that takes the direct name. However, I think there are connections with many of these going back. Really good question. Thanks for asking that. So one of the things that I wondered about, just because I knew Louisa County's history, this James M. Wright, I know to be about 10 miles west of where Susan and Winston Banks end up after the war. It was just a puzzle for me. I'm going to come back to it at the end and show you where maps can be really, really helpful. So I went to another birth record, and this is from the set from 1866 to 1870. And I looked to see if there were any other children that I could find. And in this case, I've sorted again for the last name of Banks, and you'll notice down toward the bottom I've marked it with red arrows. There is a woman named Susan Banks who has a child named Laura, and I'm pretty sure when I went back and checked, actually no, this child is born in 1869, so this is well after the war. But notice that Susan herself is doing the reporting by a few years after the war. It's just a curiosity. Is she comfortable going up to the courthouse? Is there a lot of back and forth? These people are living about 18 to 20 miles from the courthouse, so it just raises questions in my mind about how she did the reporting, but she's the one that did it. So that didn't really give me any information about a clue to an enslaver that I might find. So let's go back and try to look at a couple of other records. The first thing is returning to this 1870 census. I want to share with you something that threw me for a long time about Louisa's 1870 census. Whoever did it kind of got messed up right at the beginning, and every one of the 1870 federal census forms at the top says one of two things: either Trevilian's Depot, which is all the way almost to Gordonsville, or Fredericks Hall, which is up on the northern side of Route 33, the sort of dividing line through the middle. And for a long time, I was trying to place people that I was finding out around Trevilian's Depot, figuring out, were they working for the railroad? What was the deal? Finally, I realized they weren't out there at all. I went through and looked every single form for the southern half of the county is listed as Trevilian's Depot. So that's really all it's telling you, is they live on the southern half of the county, kind of divided by where the South Anna River flows, or Route 33 on a modern map today. Every one of them that's labeled Fredericks Hall doesn't mean at all that they're living around Fredericks Hall. It just means they're on the northern side of that north-south division of the county. So just helpful clue. But there are some other things that we can go and take a look for. There are some indications that we get from the personal property tax lists. And this is a continuation of a practice before 1865. When personal property tax lists were filled out, all of the free people of color were required to report whose property they lived on. You know, this was a form of management and control of where people are and what they're doing. That practice continued for about 4 or 5 years following the end of the Civil War as well. Demeaning as it can be, it gives in some really important information about where that person was and who they were working for. The other source is going to be Freedmen's Bureau labor contracts. And I'm going to now take you back to your PDF of the presentation. And if you'll come down to the slide where I am right now and go to the next one. And again, click on the link at the bottom, and it's going to take us back to the Piedmont, Virginia history page. And this time, we're going to take a look at what's under tab number, or listing number 2. It's called Other Records Containing Names from 1862 to 1870. So if you'll go ahead and get there with me and click on number 2, the Other Records Containing Names. And let's go through and talk a little bit about what's there. Okay. The first thing is these personal property tax records. And they, again, are from the microfilms from the Library of Virginia of the originals that are also down there at the Library of Virginia. There is maybe a second copy there are some downstairs in the Louisa County Courthouse, but they're hit and miss. There's not complete sets. They're badly tattered. So this looks as though the original set was sent down to the state archives, and they have been microfilmed. And that's what we were able to transcribe from. And the image that's showing there up at the top, you'll notice in the second column over that the top half of the column is blank. That's because those are white men, and they are not required to report where they're living or who they're working for. But starting about midway down, there is a second name in the second column behind a freedman's name, and that's the person on whose property they're living or for whom they're working. So this can be really, really helpful. If you want to go ahead and scroll down a little bit, it'll say access the combined list. Go ahead and click on it. And you can download either one of those that you want. It says FB and LCPP. That's Freedmen's Bureau and Louisa County property tax lists. I went through the index and the images of our Freedmen's Bureau field office files after we had transcribed these personal property tax lists. And if I found a reference to a freedman that was on the property tax list and also had any sort of document in the Freedmen's Bureau files, I've put that down. I've put down that reference on the microfilm roll. And they are not online, but I have a set both at home. There's also a set here in the museum. But I am glad if you see a name you're looking for listed there. My email is at the end of the presentation. Just send it to me or send it to the Historical Society and ask them to forward it on. And I'll get that image pulled for you and send you an image of that particular item. So hopefully that would be really, really helpful. And yes, if the head of a household is a woman, she is listed on the personal property tax records. So thank you, indeed. So if you can come back to your presentation now, I'm going to show you what those property tax records would look like. And they're here. So if you're looking with me at the same screen that we are here, this is what I was trying to explain. Now, I have sorted this and I've filtered it out to actually, I guess I just sorted it alphabetically, and we're looking at the B's. But look, the first 4 lines I've clipped are Winston Banks. He's the guy we're looking for. This is Granville's father. And you'll see in column B on this particular slide, the tax year. So this gives him 66, 68, 69, and 70. I don't know where he is in 67. But in those years, in 66, the form didn't have an employer. But in the following 4 years, he's with the Knuckles family. And Charles Yancey Knuckles is the person who actually inherited the main farm, whose name was Spring Hill. And so that to me is a nice confirmation that there is some ongoing relationship here with the Knuckles family. So what do we do with that? And obviously we're going to have to go and now look at Knuckles family genealogy and history. Before we leave this slide, you'll see down in under column I that there are some things highlighted in yellow. That's the reference to the Freedmen's Bureau roll. It's on roll 104, image 666 has a reference to Charles Barker. And it looks as though he's going to have a relationship with Dr. Benjamin Francisco, who lived over on Horseshoe Farm Road and owned Horseshoe Farm. So there's going to be some perhaps really good clue and information with that. But this can be a really nice source for any of you that haven't explored this yet. Look through it and see, and if you do find any of the Freedmen's Bureau references, I will happily send those right on to you as well. Okay, so that's what that particular form is going to give you. While we're here in this Piedmont, Virginia tab, if you go back to the exhibit page that had the link to access that list of combined personal property tax and scroll down a little bit, it's going to give you the Freedmen's Bureau Field Office Files Index. And there's a sample there of the Freedmen's Bureau, one of the slides out of that set. You can download there as well and get the entire index. Obviously, what I've highlighted in yellow is just the names I found that are also in the personal property tax list. You may find something different and richer, more that you're looking for by looking through that entire finding aid. And this is our thanks to Kristen Hicks, an intern who went through hundreds of these images, and they're just too big to be able to put online, which is why I say I'll send you anything that you need. The other thing is to take a link to the Freedmen's Bank records. And I've pulled those that I found that had any reference to people who were born or lived in Louisa or in Goochland counties, kind of down there near the bottom. A lot of these are not in Richmond anymore. I found some from other places, but they list their place of birth as Louisa. Don't take my work there as final. You know, these are on Ancestry.com, and I think possibly also on one of the Freedmen's Bureau sites, those record sites. So look around, but just realize there are going to be people, and it can be a clue about where your person that you're looking for ended up. For some reason, some of Richmond's records are in the South Carolina field office reports. So, you know, again, I don't know what all these records tell us about the migration of people, but for sure, if you see somebody living in Montgomery, Alabama, but says they were born in Louisa County, then that's a really good migration clue that you've got there. The last thing that's on this page is the special war tax book for 1862. It's not quite the last thing, but why this one is valuable to me, if you scroll down toward the bottom of that explanatory paragraph, you'll see where you can access the index to that special war tax book. It's only going to have a listing, for instance, of Dr. Benjamin Francisco or Charles Knuckles, all right, or this James, what's his name that we were looking for, where Susan was living. But it gives you some idea of how many people he enslaved. It has the number of people, the number of acres that person had, and some really interesting things like how many pleasure carriages, how many watches, how many pianos. You know, you really begin to get a sense of the size of the household that the enslaver has at that point, and some idea of the number of people who were enslaved by him at that place. The final link there is access to the list of 1862 runaways from Louisa County. This is fascinating to me. And there are 4 pages. It kind of shows up a little bit funny on this exhibit page that we have, but if you go and scroll down a little further, you'll see that there is a viewing of, it says view the PDF, and there are 8 pages there. It was something like 30 people who ran away from Clayton Coleman, and he enslaved over 100. But this was when the Union Army was very close to the North Anna River, and you really begin to get a sense of the just of the magnitude of runaways as soon as there was opportunity during those middle years of the war, when Union forces are close enough to Louisa to do it. So these are from the Library of Virginia, and the actual images can be found there. I put up a couple of the samples that are here as well, but it's a really great resource to be able to get the names of some of the people who took off. Let's see. The last thing, I guess, as we're there on the Piedmont, Virginia history site that might be helpful for you, in 1867, the Black voter registration rolls have been preserved, and they also are at the Library of Virginia, and you can access those lists here, and they are going to be transcribed as well in an Excel sheet. The only thing this is going to tell you is what section of the county that they lived in. It's not going to give you any reference to a former enslaver, but it is going to let you know the district, and we've got the district that's put down in there as well. So it proves their presence in the county, and it also gives you some indication geographically of where you might be able to go look. So that's those resources. Okay. Let's see. Thank you for the clue that my slides weren't advancing. Are you now seeing a slide that's headed by land, it says land records at the top? Yes, okay, good. This is something that's really easy to overlook because you have to be here in the courthouse to do it. They're not online. But I got a really important clue for Susan and Winston from the land records. And in the land records, there is a deed in Book 8 where Susan buys 25 acres of land, again, from Charles Y. Knuckles in 1881. It's interesting to me that it's deeded to Susan, and it says wife of Winston Banks, but the deed is to Susan. Just kind of curious. She, remember, also reported the child's birth fairly soon after the war. What is it about this woman? Could she read and write before the war? Is there a possibility that might she even have been a free person of color? I don't know. This is just a curiosity. Usually the deed is to the man, and it'll say and his wife, but in this case it's to Susan. It further verifies to me some connection with this Knuckles family. And this is where we just need to go ahead and do a little bit of researching. Hopefully you can find somebody's tree online on Ancestry.com to find out if there were any estate records for the Knuckles. And so this is just a picture of their family tree. It's also an old photograph of Spring Hill, which is still standing, but this was it about 1900. If you can find those kinds of things, Susan and Winston have some relationship with this place. They're working here, they're neighbors, they were formerly enslaved by them, we're not sure. So what we find out is this Charles Yancey Knuckles, who's living and deeding the property to Susan, had a father named Charles Knuckles who died in 1858. Aha! Thankfully, he died before the Civil War ended, because in his estate settlements, as we know, we're possibly going to be able to get some lists of his property, but it's going to include the people that he enslaved. So when we go and look again at that Piedmont, Virginia history site, you'll see that what I've pointed to is in item 4, there's an index of Louisa County wills and estate settlements through 1865. Again, the images are just there. There are thousands and thousands of them. And they also, the clerk of court here, anyway, you still have to pay a fee to get a copy of an image in the clerk's office. So they aren't really ours to put up online yet, but the index is there. And again, if you find an estate record that you would like to see, just let me know or let the Historical Society know, and we'll send you the individual image. But they can be really, really helpful. Like in this one, this is a list of the people who are enslaved by Charles Knuckles and which of his children receives which one of the people that he enslaved. Unfortunately, as I go through here, I don't see any obvious name, Winston or Susan. Suki can be a nickname for Susan. It's possible, but names change. So I don't know if some of these that are in here, like Pompey, I point that one out. One thing I do notice, and I don't know if you can see it, it's in the 1, 2, 3, 4, it's in the 5th line from the bottom. And it says, and to Charles Yancey Knuckles, Edward, Rose and a child, and Isaac. If names stuck in your mind, remember in the 1870 census, the name of the family that was living directly below Winston and Susan was Edward Smith. Interesting. So it's possible for somebody else that we've just found the track back to Edward. But this is obviously the kind of thing that we'd love to be able to find. And the index to those estate records is there in the Piedmont, Virginia history site. Before we leave this couple, I realized as I've been doing some work with Goochland and Louisa and just sort of the statistics of this, about 3 to 4%, depending on the time period of Louisa's population, was free Black before the war. And Goochland has a lot more. It can be upwards of 10%. So when you think back to the number of generations from you to get back to this period of about 1865, 1840, thereabouts, most of us would have about 32 ancestors. All right. So even one is going to fall within the possibility of this margin of the number of people who were free. So really be sure that you go through each of the surnames that you find through births and deaths and marriages and any of those other records and just run a check on them to see if possibly they are free people of color well before the Civil War. There is a listing. Here we're back again at the Piedmont, Virginia site. The item number 3 is going to be the free Blacks in Louisa County. And we actually have put up the images from the bond book that's still over in the courthouse of the certificate that was issued to each person. And they go up through about the 1850s. So that's a really good resource. There are a couple of other places that we can check as well. And I am going to go real quick and actually look at that because it seems to me like we have and you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm on the Piedmont, Virginia site, and I'm looking at number 3, free Blacks in Louisa County. You'll see the reference to the Free Black Register and where you can access that that index. Yeah, I thought there was something else on that tab. So there's the index to the register that you can download and look through. And the beauty of it is you can sort it by alphabet and then just go down through and look for all of your names pretty quickly. There also in there is the 1860 and 1850 and 1830 lists from Louisa County from the federal census with Black or mulatto families, households highlighted. All right. So So there are a few occasions when, although people should be registered in the courthouse, they maybe were registered before this particular book that we have was created, but they're kind of grandfathered in on this. And so you may well find a name as well in one of these lists from 1860 or 1850, and then Carter G. Woodson did the one from 1830 that I pulled. The final resource for you to see there is a wonderful book. If you all are not familiar with this particular book, go this way. Paul Hennig was a scholar who pulled together the resources from a number of other people who worked at state libraries and archives and so on, and they compiled a list of free African Americans from Virginia and North Carolina. And the link to that website is at the very bottom of this particular page that I'm looking at. It's called freeafricanamericans.com. And the first link that's within it is Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And when you go there, you'll see that you can look by alphabetical clusters. And it'll give, these are wonderfully documented with deed book, court orders, page books, where there's a reference to these people throughout the county records. There's also a lot else that's on that website. There you're going to have lists of Indians who were enslaved, who were free, who were mixed. It's really worth looking through. I think you can find some really rich items in there, colonial tax lists, and service in the Revolutionary War, which seems like we've seen a couple of, oh, Randy, thanks. Yeah, it's this. It's a white book that's called Free African Americans in North Carolina and Virginia. But you don't need to go buy it because he's put the whole thing online on that website. That's freeafricanamericans.com. And the link to it is off of the Piedmont, Virginia site. So really, really helpful and worth pursuing, because if you've even found one ancestor in that, among those people, boy, you can go back several generations further and possibly get back to their manumission papers as well. This is just a little image that I've taken on this slide from that page where we just were, and you see at the bottom of it is access to the Free African Americans. That's the entirety of Paul Hennig's book, and it's available there for you. What I suspect, although I've not been able to find Winston's any direct link for Winston Banks to the free banks who were there, what I did find is that starting early, mid-1700s, when a Jane Banks was bound out to William Leake in Goochland County, because I know the area and the maps thing, the property, the plantation of William Leake is in a little community called East Leake, and it is just through the woods, a mile and a half from the Knuckles farm, plantation, whatever you want to call it. So there are lots of banks who are there in that area. I would sure keep looking and pursuing. But this is the kind of thing that's really, really helpful if you can find and then blend it with whoever can give you some knowledge of local history to maybe make some geographic connections that are there as well. Some of the things that are really helpful to look for some supplemental information too, especially for free people of color. In this next slide, there's a nice collection of items, if you've not found it yet, at the Library of Virginia. And if you're in your PDF, rather than the online presentation, in your PDF, you can go to that hot link. And if you do that, what you'll find is that we've got it'll say Virginia Untold, searching the narrative. And what I've done sometimes when I'm just bored and it's 95 degrees is I'll go down to the drop-down tab for localities, and I'll just put in Louisa County or Goochland County or Hanover County. And when you do that and tell it to go search, it's going to bring up for you every item for that county, but every individual item. And some of these you're going to see, like the first one is a list of free Negroes, 1853. You're going to find those that were delinquent in taxes. You're going to sometimes find those whose labor to pay off that delinquency of taxes was sold at the courthouse. A lot of times the state purchases their labor, whole other story. Freedom suits you'll find that are there. Certificates of freedom are going to be listed. And this is where I found the one, now I'm back to the presentation, that I've copied here, and it's a voucher for Elisha Banks, who lost his free papers on the sloop Sally in 1824. Just an odd tidbit of paper, but for anybody looking for the Banks family, it's a real treasure. So it's worth browsing through. There might be 100, 150 items. They're pretty well titled, so it doesn't take too long, really, to go through and take a look at those. Sometimes you make some really wonderful discoveries. And this was one where I knew somebody was actually looking for an individual called Anderson Johnson. And I was looking through the Goochland records, and I found this. And it's a little slip of paper saying that Anderson Johnson is entitled to his freedom in accordance with the will of my father, signed by John Wright in Goochland. So obviously there's a will from the father of John Wright. So of course, we head to the Goochland County Courthouse. And sure enough, we found the will, and it's Hezekiah White. And he filed this in the 1830s. And when we go down and take a look at this, it's very clear here he's manumitting, and he lists the people. I don't know how well you can read or see this, but he's listing them, including a woman named Sally. So when I went to the estate inventory, it got even better. There is a listing of Sally and 7 children vis-a-vis George Anderson. That's the man we're looking for, Anderson Johnson, James, Thomas, Frederick, Albert, and Elizabeth. So the moral of the story is, if you've got some time or you've got some friends that you're looking for as well, just take some time when it's hot and go to that Library of Virginia site from the link that's there in the presentation that you've been able to download, and just look through by county where you might find something that would be of help. There also are a couple of other interesting sources. I'm sure about Chronicling America and Chronicling Virginia, the historic newspapers. Just put in any combinations that you can of words. I've done things like Louisa County Negro runaway, Louisa County, Goochland County runaway, and you'll find the runaway slave ads, which again can just be really insightful to see. It's better than a good book just to even read the stories. But if you should find the possibility of it being someone who's either the ad is put forth by an enslaver of some people that are your ancestors, or possibly it might even be the story of how one of your ancestors got free. The last one is a fairly recent website, and it's called Information Wanted. And they've gone through the ads that were put in the decades following the Civil War, where families were looking for those that had been divided by the sale of people who were enslaved. And there were a lot of them from Central Virginia. The enslaved population holds really steady, but the birth rate and the death rate don't make sense for the population to hold steady. the logical conclusion is a lot of those people, when they came of age, were then sent to Richmond and were auctioned and sent south. There are a number of estate sale records that we've got, and the people who are buying them are the Alejandros and some others who have the slave trading houses, auction houses down in Shockoe Bottom. The Library of Virginia also did a really complete exhibit about 4 years ago now, entitled To Be Sold. And I've not been down there to look at what records they use to pull from that. But if there are sale records from the houses on Shockoe Bottom, they would be there at the Library of Virginia. But some of these are just really poignant. Wants to know the whereabouts of my daughter, Rosa Shelton, who was born a little above Goochland Courthouse. The place was owned by Tom Dean, so there you have the enslaver's name. Her mother, Harriet, died before the war of grief of her husband, Nat Shelton, having been sold away from her. And you'll notice that this is filed by Elder Nat Shelton, and he listed this in the paper. I don't have a date along with this image, but it seems like it was maybe 15 or 20 years after the war, possibly even later than that. It's in the Richmond Planet. But they're just really a nice, rich source of information, and they've extracted a lot of those and put it here on this website. You may run across some of these also as you search the Library of Congress and Library of Virginia's Chronicling America and Chronicling Virginia site. So the last thing I want to go through is maps. We talked a little bit about them. Remember, I was puzzled why Missouri Ellen was born to Susan, and it was reported by James M. Wright, when I was thinking James Wright from the Old Home Places Louisa County book was about 10 miles further to the west. This is a clip from the 1863 Civil War engineers map of the area right here where Winston and Granville and Susan lived following the war. It's right here in a little community called Orchid. You probably can't see it very clearly, but kind of just below the label Gardner's New Road, there's a yellow dot, and that is Spring Hill, which was the Knuckles home. And lo and behold, about a half a mile down the road, there's the address of a Wright. And when I looked then in the census from 1860 to see, sure enough, there's James M. Wright, and he's living down in this corner of the woods, so no wonder. So again, I don't know if he was the enslaver. I don't know if Susan was later sold to the Knuckles family. I don't know the story, but at least I realize I'm still in the right neck of the woods. I have not pursued to see if there is a Wright estate sale during that time period. That would be a really welcome research as well. On this page, on the link, view this map of Louisa County, it's going to take you to our ArcGIS site. And there are going to be 2 Civil War maps that you can download, and they'll have the names of some people that are around there. And if you are interested in pursuing a little bit more with these maps, shoot me an email. There's one that I've got where there are a lot of overlay of layers of information, including slave births and deaths, and it's layered over with the owners. The problem with making it public so that you all can see it, if anybody accidentally changes something on it, it changes that layer across every map that we've done. So in time, I want to get the person who handles our ArcGIS to make some of this public, but I'll do a search, help you with doing a search if you find anything on here that could be a helpful resource. So that's mainly it. The last slide is going to have my email address, which you're welcome to use, but I'm going to come back here to the maps. So Does anybody have any questions you want to put out? I hope you were able to get through and maybe download a number of those databases that we were looking at. And again, you've got the presentation, so you can go back through and download them again. But this just has a tremendous amount that's right in here on this place called the Land Between the Rivers. Well, you know, I just really think to go through all of your ancestors and those surnames, making sure that some of them might not have been free before the war ended. I've just been surprised that in maybe I'd say 50% of the families that I've worked with so far, there's been at least one ancestor that is. And so it just opens a door into this really important second piece. Carol asked, when is the next class? You know, I talked with Carlene about this. The Demio that she's using only allows 3 people to be interactive across the top. But it seems like we might be able to do either a Zoom meeting of some sort, or if somebody's got access to the Zoom that's beyond just the 40-minute freebie kind of thing, I would welcome the chance to be able to do kind of an interactive and help us look together some. Yeah, you know, she may well have had a different name. That's the other thing, Natan, thanks for mentioning that. Part of the problem with this is that, you know, people, there seems to be a lot of name change until you kind of land on something a little more permanent in the, maybe by the 1900 census. Was there, or an index? Randy, what book are you thinking of? I see your note. Yeah, I remember one fella I was working with. Purrington was the last name, and the freedman went by Purrington in one index, and then the next index with a different name, and then back to Purrington. But there was an enslaver named Purrington that we finally got to with some of the records, and they were able to pursue those a little bit more. And I don't, the one, yes, Randy, the actual book, The Free African Americans of North Carolina, is the entire text of the book. I mean, if you go to the tab that says Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, free people, you'll see it divided by alphabet, like A through C or something. And when you go to that tab, it's going to be the entire print. Everything that you would get in the book is there online for that family. You can tell that these are people who are committed to getting the information that they're producing out. They simply printed it really as a courtesy for someone who wants the library, but every bit of information is there. Natan, I don't know of any railroad records. The C&O the C&O records are down in Clifton Forge, and it might be worth a call down there to just see if they possibly have any records that far back that might have to do with employers and employees. I don't know if they hid from the census taker as much as it was hot and it was July, and the census taker just wasn't going to walk down that road to go pick up 1 or 2 families. I suspect it was more that. Obviously, somebody could have had a reason for hiding, but I see it later on as well. It's just kind of an incomplete census that the census taker did in a couple of cases. He could not have known somebody lived down there as well. I don't know. Anyway, so the only thing to do is just kind of look around a little further, and possibly, again, you may find, Natan, your person listed in those personal property tax lists that list people and where they're working, because it does go up through 1870. So maybe you'll find them there. That's a second verification. And no, railroad employees wouldn't necessarily be documented in the labor contract. I think that there are a couple of them in those labor contracts that are for a railroad. There are a couple that are for, they seem to be bigger factories, maybe the tobacco factories that were around Fredericks Hall, but not all of them by any means. I don't know who supervised those labor contracts, but they aren't in the Freedmen's Bureau records to the degree that I know there were people working. So back to the question, let's see. Oh, Ralph, yeah. Yeah, it's through Gmail, and it's like a Google GoToMeeting thing. I guess what I'd say is, if you all will just kind of chime in right now in the chat column, if you'd like to kind of stay in touch and possibly get together online with some other sort of a forum, maybe even just a second meeting like this, that could work. Just say so right now over in the chat box. Just let me know yes, and I see your name, and then that way I'll know who to email and stay in touch with afterward. Okay, great. That's about all I've got. And I think the best thing is just to dig in and start looking through those records. And you may find some that I didn't know about. So anyway, thank you very, very much. This worked better than I thought it might. So my thanks to all of you. And I'll look forward to hearing from each of you. Thanks a lot.